Alright guys, welcome back to the Craftsman Pie Cupboard project. So if you're here specifically to learn how to fume white oak with ammonia, there will be a timestamp down in the description. We're going to be dealing with that more near the end of the video once we have our shelves put together. But basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making our shelves for this project. And so the center section of our shelves are going to be a frame and panel design. We're going to be fuming those center sections, which we glued up already. These sections, which are going to be our floating internal section of the shelves, these are going to be what's going to be getting fumed with ammonia. So we're going to be dealing with that near the end of the video. But if you're here for the actual project itself, you guys know from the last video that we still need to work on a few things on the actual frame itself, mainly the side panels, which is what we're going to be dealing with first. So we've got these two big walnut panels that are just over 3/8 of an inch thick. So we need to go through, mill them down to their final thickness of 3/8 of an inch. Then we're going to go through, add a cove profile around the edges and get them fitted up into here. And so this is a pretty quick and easy process. Again, there's nothing super complex about it. Because these panels are so thin, I don't have to try and joint them perfectly flat. And so all I really have to do is go through here and clean up a bunch of the squeeze out with my cheap hand plane. Again, I've mentioned this many times before. It's a cheap hand plane. It would really literally cost me nothing. It's all rusted out. Was a cheap one. It's a cheap old hand plane that's not worth restoring. That's why I use it for cleaning up glue, just in case you guys are wondering. And so once we've got that, then we'll pass it to the planer a few times, get it down to its final thickness, and then we'll go in and add the cove profile. Alright, so we've got our two walnut side panels cut to size. Now let me explain how you actually figure out what size to cut these to. It's actually fairly simple. Adding these cove profiles or shaker profiles, whatever one you decide to go with, it's always been a fairly complex thing for me. I've never really quite figured it out. I've always ended up having to cut it to a size that I think will fit, cut the cove profile, and then I always am going back and forth between the table saw and the router, just constantly adding, taking off a little bit, adding profile back, taking off a little bit more on the table saw, adding more profile back with the router. And it takes forever to fit them. But I had this kind of epiphany when I was working on it, is that all I really have to do is cut these as if I was fitting a normal 1/4 inch panel. And so all that means is that because I know that I have a 1/4 inch deep groove built on my frame itself, I know I want to have these panels going in there about 3/16 or so, a little bit around, or right around there. And so all I did was some really simple math that you guys saw me draw on some paper here. And so all I did was add 3/8 to my overall inside measurement of the open area of the frame. And so it is a little bit complex and does take some thought process. And if you don't like doing math, then I'm sure there's other ways you can do this. But I found that this is actually a really simple way to do it, is you just take the internal measurement of that frame, the inside box that you're trying to fit this thing into, then add how deep you want it to go into those grooves, make sure you double it for both sides, and you're there. It really is that easy. And so this is our cove profile bit. It's actually a really nice bit. It's from Lee Valley. It's got a 1/2 inch shank, and it's just a nice simple cove. Now you can get these bits in a lot of different shapes. I like this one. I also want to get a shaker one sometime soon because it adds I think it's a 35-degree angle, which is a little bit more traditional looking, whereas this cove the rounded is a little more modern. You can also get, I think, OG is something like that, and it adds the little bumps to it, something like that. There's all different styles, but this one's my favorite. And so all it does is, again, it just adds that little bit of a cove to the edge of the panel and just adds a very small reveal. And so all we need to do with this bit is run it around this panel until this panel fits into that spot. And the way you make sure it fits is just by raising the bit, because as you go up with the bit, it's going to cut a deeper or a more exaggerated curve into the piece of wood. And so the way this bit works is that up by the bearing here, there's a flat section that tapers into a curve. And so the higher this bit goes up, the more material you're taking away, the farther that flat section is going into this piece, and the more curve you're going to be getting. So in this case, we're only taking off about 1/8 of an inch material. So we're not going to get a super dramatic curve, but it's going to be just a very slight curve to add a little bit of visual interest. So that's exactly what I'm going for. It's a look that I really like, and so I think it's going to look spectacular on these walnut panels. Okay, so that looks really good. I absolutely love this coming together now. The walnut and the white oak combination, by far my favorite wood combination out there. And so all we need to do now is finish this. We'll do some hand planing, a little bit of sanding around our reveal area. And so what I will mention is this panel right here worked out really well. All I had to do was set the router bit to get it to the right height. It fit in, it slid in really nicely. The panel on the other side, on the other hand, it was a pain in the absolute butt. What ended up happening is one of the edges, I think it was the back side on the other panel, it was a little bit too, I don't know, it had a little bit of curl in it, there might have been a knot, something. But the outer edges kept blowing out on me, which meant that I didn't have a square edge for the bearing of the router bit to actually ride against. And so what I ended up having to do was take about a 1/16 of an inch off one of the edges, so the panels aren't perfectly identical, and if you put them side by side, you can visually tell that that they are different. But because they're on two different sides of this big cabinet here, you'll never notice the difference. And so all I have to be careful of is when I actually do the glue up on this thing, I have to make sure that on the other side, I set the reveal, or I pay a little bit more attention to the reveal. Because this one fairly well stays in place exactly where I want it to. It keeps the equal reveal around all the edges. Whereas the reveal on the other one is just a little bit different. Again, it's barely noticeable, but there is definitely more movement in the panel because I didn't change the height of the bit when I cut off that 1/16 of an inch off the edge. So that means it's just a little bit thinner than it needs to be, and there's just that little bit of extra movement in there that doesn't need to be there. But I didn't want to keep the overall Cove size the same. So this part we're done with. Now we're on to the shelves, which we're going to be doing again. A frame and panel design, but we're also going to be getting into the fun part of playing with some ammonia. All right, so I've gone through and I've milled the pieces for our shelves. Now, the only really important thing here is that when we do the planing, we're going to our final thickness that we need for these shelves. We need to make sure that at the same time we're planing all of our frame pieces, we're also planing the center of them, which is the panel section. Because when we put these together, we want them to all be the exact same thickness, so they're still flush. We don't want, if you're putting books or something in there, we don't want them to bump as they go through or to have the spines or anything get smashed up when you're trying to put them in this cabinet. So we want to make sure that these are flush all the way across. And the only way to make sure of that is to plane them all the same thickness. Now, if you have something like a drum sander, you can definitely get it closer on the planer and then put it through the drum sander when it's fully assembled before you actually install it in the cabinet. But this is the best way I can do it for now. Okay, so we've got our shelf frames mostly made. The only one I haven't made yet is the one that's going to support our drawers, but it's a little bit different than these ones, so I wanted to save it for a different time when I can focus on it a little bit more. And I don't actually mix it up with what I'm doing on these ones. And so you can see here the frame is fairly simple. It is literally just a frame. Then we've got a rabbet along the outer two edges that'll fit into those dados we cut into the vertical uprights. Now we've got two minor issues here that were more of an oversight on my part more than anything else. Also, you'll have to ignore the howling sound in the background. We currently have 80-kilometer-an-hour winds here in Calgary, and it is hitting right against the back wall of my garage, so it is quite loud. And so the first minor issue that I've got here is that my pieces aren't self-referencing. Now what that normally means is that when you put, normally when you put a bridle joint together, you can push them together, clamp them full force, and then they'll reference against the inside edges of each other, and you'll be fine and dandy. But the problem is here, our outside edges, so our short ones, when we can pull them together, they're perfect. But our long ones, so our front and back pieces, when we pull them in tight, they don't align anymore. Because we cut that rabbet in there, we're basically a ½ inch out of alignment on those. So the only trick there is going to be when I do the glue up, I just have to make sure to double check the alignment there and clamp these corners down nice and hard. That way they don't move around when I'm applying clamping pressure. But that can also be fixed by fixing our other minor problem here. So we ended up taking out the entire length of the rabbet on our side piece that actually would hold it in place. So now when you put our side pieces in, they just fully wobble in. They don't have any grip in the cabinet itself. They need to have the longer stretcher pieces stuck in there too. But then our longer stretcher pieces are a little bit too thick to properly fit in there. Now, if everything had come together perfectly, if the moons and the planets had all aligned, all this would have worked out perfectly. We all would have been within, they were all supposed to be the same 1/4 inch measurement. It was supposed to be a 1/4 inch groove. This tenon coming through should have been a 1/4 inch thick, which should have filled up the exact spacing we took out on our rabbet, which all should have worked out perfectly. But again, when we're working, we all know from practice that doesn't happen. So all of our joints are really nice and tight, fit really well. All of that is perfect. We just have to end up working down this edge a little bit. So that's not going to be hard at all. But then you can also see that we've got that little gap in there for where we have that movement. So what I'm going to do now to make my life a little bit easier is I'm just going to mill up a few really thin white oak pieces that I'm going to fit into these little slots. And so I've got them on all 4 corners of each shelf, so we're going to need a decent amount of these little pieces. And I'm just going to mill them exactly to these dimensions here that I need. So we'll make them a little bit oversized, clean them up with the hand plane, all that kind of stuff. And then when we actually do the glue up for this thing, we'll be able to actually apply clamping pressure across it, apply it along the long edge, and we'll be able to just clamp these up really nice and strong. And so with this all framed out now we can start trying to fit up our panel. So our panel is what we're going to be fuming eventually in the video here. I know I keep talking about it. I promise you we're going to get to it. It's a long process and I really want to get it going so that I can actually get this video out in a reasonable amount of time. And so what I want to do today and what I want to try to get done today is get those small pieces fit, make sure that these shelves, I can clamp them up fully so I can get good accurate measurements. Then once we have those good accurate measurements, we're going to throw a dado stack into the table saw, cut our rabbets around the outside of those panels, and then we should be good to go. So it's all going to be, again, it's going to be a very simple process, but I'm really excited to get going with it. All right, so we've got all our shelves fitted up now. They fit beautifully into those dados we cut into the vertical uprights here. Everything lines up super nicely. They're all nice and firm in there. They're not going to wobble around. And surprisingly enough, our bottom shelf lines up almost perfectly with our bottom stretcher. It's just slightly above, so by the time we do some sanding and add a little chamfer there, you'll never notice a difference. And if it's just a little bit above, it'll help act as a stop for our doors that we're going to be putting on here. So overall, it's coming together beautifully. Now, initially my plan was to ammonia fume just the inner panels of these shelves. That's why I made them the way they are. That was the whole plan in the beginning. Now, from there, I realized when I was actually putting these together that I wasn't going to be able to do that nicely enough. Because these panels are not sitting perfectly in the shelves, I didn't want to have to fume them because now I'm going to have to go in and sand them to make sure that they're nice and flat in there. But what we're going to do is instead of fuming the inside, we're just going to fume the whole shelves and go for a nice medium brown on there. Now what we have to do in order to prepare for the fuming process of these shelves is we first need to sand them up to 220 grit. So our normal sanding process, our normal finish sanding process. And all we're going to do is we're just going to start at 80 grit and work our way up to 220 grit, kind of going through the grits as you normally would. And this will just make sure these shelves are all nice and smooth and ready for finish. Then once we have them fully sanded, we're going to apply a single coat of beeswax finish. So we're going to be applying a paste wax in this case because I found that this works really well. And so we're going to be using a nice lightweight paste wax to finish our shelves here. For our first coat, again, this is probably what I would have used to finish the shelves anyway, because having that extra beeswax coating on there does add a little bit of bonus protection. But anyway, let's get on to sanding these and adding all of our edge profiles and all that and getting these ready for finish. That way we can actually hopefully get these into the ammonia fuming process tonight and have them out of the bag in a few days here. Alright guys, so we've now reached the part of the video where we're going to start dealing with ammonia. So ammonia is a highly dangerous chemical. The fumes of it can cause a lot of severe reactions, blindness, loss of taste, loss of sense of smell, burning on the skin, all that kind of stuff. So you need to make sure you're taking proper precautions. As you can see behind me, this is a big garage door. It's a 2-car garage door that can fully open with multiple other windows or doors around here that I can open. Anytime I'm dealing with this, anytime I'm opening the buckets, anything like that, I make sure that even though on camera you might see the door is closed, after I've opened those buckets, the doors and all the windows in this garage are open to fully ventilate. Now, some of the safety precautions that I'm going to be taking, like I mentioned, I'm in a big garage with lots of airspace to fill up so that the ammonia fumes can dissipate fairly easily. I have a big door behind me that I can open to ventilate the area quickly. I'm going to be wearing a half face respirator with ammonia-approved cartridges. I'm going to be wearing long gauntlet nitrile gloves, and that should be enough. Alright, so with our ammonia fuming done, let's actually go back to the beginning and talk about the process for this. So what you're going to need for ammonia fuming, first off, is some form of ammonia. Now this is Frank's just household all-purpose ammonia cleaner. You can buy it at Canadian Tire, it's about $2 a jug, super cheap, easy to work with, and has a very low ammonia content. I think it's about 1 to 3%. So this stuff is a heck of a lot safer to work with compared to your janitorial or industrial strengths. Janitorial strength is generally around 10%, industrial is around 25%. Both of those are extremely toxic and you have to be a lot more careful with. But this is fairly simple. You can see that there's no Wemyss symbols or anything on the bottle, so it's nothing super deadly. Now you still have to take a lot of precautions with it, especially when you're doing what we're doing with these shelves. There is a lot of ammonia fumes building up in there, and so you still have to take the proper precautions. So those precautions are, first off, you need to be wearing long gauntlet gloves. Now you can pick these up, I think again they were like $3 for the pair of these at Canadian Tire. And all the long gauntlet means is that it actually goes and covers onto your sleeves a little bit. The other thing you're going to need, and this is an absolute necessity, is ammonia filters for your respirator. Now for your respirator, if you have the same one as me, I think it's a 3M half face mask. You know, a lot of the 3M masks are very popular. And so I highly suggest picking up one of these if you're working in a wood shop, because you have the option to change all your filters. Very useful. But most of the time they'll either come with these dust pads or just the organic fume filters, you know, for staining and all that. You want to cut out those fumes. Neither of these will cut it for ammonia, because ammonia is such an aggressive type of gas. It's very corrosive, very aggressive. You need to have a special type of filter, which is these ones. Now, they aren't very expensive. I think the organic ones are usually around $15 to $18 a piece, and these ones were only $23 a piece. And if you're in Canada, the easiest place I found to get them is from Uline. So they're not expensive at all, and they will do a much better job than the organic one. So that's pretty much all the safety precautions. If you're really worried about splashing in that, you can also get like swim goggles over your eyes. Again, that's more so, I'd say, if you're doing dumb stuff. Again, if you got to be very careful when you're pouring, you want to keep your face away from it. Again, it's just all about taking the proper precautions. I do suggest getting the like swim goggles or something if you're not in a very well ventilated area. But again, for me, I can open my garage door and fumigate or air out this area really well, so I don't have to worry about the fumes getting in my eyes. So again, to go over the precautions, all you need to have a good set of long gauntlet nitrile gloves, ammonia filters for your respirator, and be in a well-ventilated area. Those are the main important things. Now, the next part of this is why we actually want to do this. Now, this is a very old-school technique for aging or staining wood. It's a chemical stain, so that's why you're using chemicals to stain the wood and change its color. And the only reason this works is because white oak has a very high tannin concentration. Same with red oak and maple, they also have very high tannin concentrations, and that's what is actually causing the change. If you do this with walnut or cherry, you will see a change to it, but won't be as drastic as what happens with oak or maple. So that's where it comes from. I think the story is that they were storing white oak in a barn, and just the amount of horse or pig urine that was in the barn caused the wood to turn this nice brown color, and that's where they figured out about ammonia fuming. So again, it goes back to the olden days of woodworking, so it's kind of a cool old school traditional method for changing the color of wood in a kind of natural way. Again, very toxic, very dangerous, but still natural, technically speaking. And so the biggest thing to consider when you want to try fuming with ammonia is that based on the concentration that you're using and the time you have it in the fuming area is going to affect the color. And also, as I learned on these shelves here, the distance between your piece and the actual ammonia itself will affect it. But I've got a lot of really cool test pieces here that I'll zoom in the camera on. Okay, so going through our pieces, the first one here was a 48-hour exposure to the ammonia fumes in a small plastic container with one of those tins that you guys saw me use full of ammonia. Now, this is a fairly high amount of ammonia fuming. The more ammonia you have in those tins, the more fumes are going to be produced, obviously. So this over 48 hours went that nice brown color. Now again, this was the piece that I went and put finish on one side beforehand, and the other side has no finish on it. You can see the side with no finish is a little bit more grayer tones, whereas this side is a little bit more nice warmer browns. This next one was a 72-hour exposure. So it's very, very dark, but you can see here that it doesn't really go in very far. But this is what kind of made me worry about doing this process, because this has a very green hue to it, and I wasn't a huge fan of that. This was the first piece I tried, and I just kind of left it in there for those 72 hours, and yeah, it came out looking like this, and I was kind of iffy about it. But once I actually went through and started doing the testing on the shelf pieces here, I also threw a couple pieces in that small bucket and just left them. I think these were sitting in there for 5 or 6 days, something like that. And these have gone to a very beautiful dark brown. Now, something that was really interesting when I took these out of the fuming bags is that we had a really big area of staining. Now, I'm going to pan the camera out and show you guys here. And so this piece was sitting right above where the ammonia was. literally about 1 or 2 inches. So obviously what happened is the ammonia fumes really just got trapped in that main area right under this piece and really managed to stain and darken it. Now, obviously this is not such a great result, and sadly it's on the right on the top side of one of the shelves. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to just try and lightly sand over these, see if I can knock back that color a little bit. If that doesn't work, then I'll just flip it over and treat it as the bottom side, because the other side turned out just fine. It's all the same nice brown color as the rest of the other the other two. So for these shelves, all I did for the ammonia fuming was I did a 42 hours of exposure time, and after the first 24 hours, I just went in and re-upped the ammonia in the tins, because as it evaporates, it gets to a lower level, so you can just add a little bit more to keep the ammonia fumes nice and strong. And now what I really love about this is that this is not a color that you can mimic with a stain. Because it is aging the wood as well as darkening it and coloring it and all that, you cannot mimic this with a stain. The look that you get after about 42 hours, 48 hours of just fuming it is just a look that is so itself. It's just a very special look because you get a lot of the cool older looking grays through the grains, and it just is a very interesting look that I really love. So I'll probably be playing around with more ammonia fuming in the future. Probably trying to get darker, play around. If I could get this whole look over the entire project, that would be spectacular. But the way it is right now is a little bit problematic. So it all comes down to trial and error. This is my first time really doing large pieces, fuming large pieces. So I definitely did learn a lot from doing it, and I'm really excited to keep going with it. But as for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to work on doing a little bit of sanding on these. But the last thing we need to do in this video is get the drawer support, the top shelf that's going to actually support our drawers. We need to get that built and fit it in place. All right, guys, so this is going to do it for this video. So we've managed to get all of our shelves fitted up, the ammonia fuming done on our main shelving. Our drawer supports are all in there and fitting up really nicely. Everything is just coming together very well. So we're going to be talking about the whole finishing process in the next video. So if you guys are interested in seeing that, make sure you subscribe. And as always, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.